Good morning. Welcome to week 4 of the Exodus Sunday School class. My name is Paul Reeder, and I'm here at Great Valley. I'm going to be leading us through the next couple chapters of Exodus. So for week 4, we're going to look at chapters 5, 6, and then the first couple verses of chapter 7. So if you have a moment, pause this, take a minute, read through chapters 5, 6, and the beginning of chapter 7. I think it's through verse 7. And then jump back on, and we'll go from there. All right, if I start reading in chapter 5, but before we do that, when we ended chapter 4, Israel had been essentially told by Moses, hey, God's moving on your behalf. He's here to rescue you from slavery. And there's a sense in which at the end of chapter 4, they are they're excited. It says they believe and they worship. They're convinced it's going to happen. Moses and Aaron have done signs. They're convinced something real is happening, and you kind of get this idea that something's about to break over. The event that's going to happen is ready to go. So there's kind of this level of excitement. And then chapter 5 starts. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." So now for the first time, Moses and Aaron are actually confronting Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the king of Egypt. He's the powerhouse. He is thought of by Egyptians as kind of a son of God, kind of a divine figure in and of himself. So he is across the board the powerhouse of Egypt. He represents Egyptian power. He represents the gods. He himself is, like I said, semi-divine. And so Moses and Aaron are literally going up against, as it were, a god of sorts. And notice what they say. They don't just say, hey, we're telling you to let this guy go. They're saying, Yahweh, this God is saying, these are my people. I am claiming them, and you need to submit to me and let them go. So you got to understand, there's a big power play move going on here. Notice what he says, let them go so they can hold a feast to me in the wilderness. So the idea is my people need to be set free so they can serve me instead of you. And the idea is a feast, a festival. It's time to celebrate and worship. This is our God. Verse 2, but Pharaoh said, and this is pretty key, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. So there's Pharaoh's response. I don't know who you're talking about. This God, Yahweh, I'm not aware of him. And the idea isn't just, hey, I've never heard about him, or I once read an article about that guy. I've heard of that Yahweh God. No, the idea is I have no relationship with this God. This isn't a God that I should be concerned about. It would be like someone walking up to you on the street and saying, give me the keys to your car right now. I am the president of Russia. And you'd say, I don't know who you are. That's ridiculous. I'm not giving you my keys. But you have to understand, in that context, that's kind of what is going on here. There's something almost ridiculous about two guys walking in, representing a group of slaves, a nation of slaves, and telling this powerhouse king, it'd be like the president of the United States, I'm a nobody, but this God that you've never heard of is demanding that you let his people go. And, of course, if you were president of the United States and someone told you to turn over all your tanks or turn over all your weapons or whatever, it would seem ludicrous. And that's essentially what Pharaoh's saying. That is ludicrous. I don't know this God. Who is he? He has no credibility with me. Verse 3, then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. So Moses kind of doubles down here and says, hey, this is pretty serious. This God has met with us. The God of the Hebrews, the God of the slave people, which is somewhat ironic, right? Because they're not coming from a position of power, but Moses is kind of acting like they are. And God wants him essentially to say, hey, this God has met with us, and if we don't obey him, there are consequences for us, which Moses has experienced, right? God attempted to put him to death last chapter. So Moses is coming saying, hey, this is the real deal. Pharaoh, you need to listen. We need to obey this God. But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens. And Pharaoh said, behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them rest from their burdens. The same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their foremen, you shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks as in the past. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But the number of bricks that they made in the past, you shall impose on them. You shall by no means reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry, let us go and offer sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid on the men, that they may labor at it and pay no regard to lying words. So Pharaoh says a lot here, and notice what he does. He doesn't just say, hey, stop what you're saying. He begins to lay consequences for what Moses and Aaron are doing on the people they are trying to rescue. So he accuses them of being idle. He says, you are taking the people away from them their work. And it's kind of funny. In one of the commentaries I read, it said that we have ancient records from Egyptian dynasties where one of the big issues with having labor from essentially other nations that worshiped other gods, people would apparently often come and say, hey, I need to take the day off to go worship my God, and you really want my God to be happy with you, so you really need to give me the day off. And it became a major issue, according to this commentary, in Egypt. People would essentially try to get a day off work to say, hey, I need to go and worship, and if I worship my God, he will bless me, he'll bless you. And Pharaoh is essentially saying, I think you guys this is just a ploy for you to get out of work. I think actually you don't need less work. I think you need more work. So notice what he does. He burdens Israel's people further. And not only that, he takes away their ability to work efficiently. So now he's saying, instead of using straw to make bricks, which was provided to them, we believe they made bricks by taking mud, clay, mixing it. They'd use the straw as a kind of binding. So you'd form bricks around the straw. You'd set them out either in the heat of the day or in a kiln. They would dry out and essentially become hardened bricks, hardened building materials. And Pharaoh is essentially saying, I'm taking away one of your essential elements, all the straw, which you need to build bricks, but now I'm requiring the exact same number. And if you don't produce, well, that's on you. And that's going to lead to trouble. You are idle. And notice at the very end of 9, you can't miss it. Pay no regard to lying words. So he's accusing Moses and Aaron of lying. You guys are liars. There is no God that's doing this. You're just trying to get the people out of their work, and now you're causing them trouble. So you just got to pause for a second and see what's going on. Right now, the people of Israel are going to feel like not only have Moses and Aaron not made their situation better, but in obeying God, and essentially Moses is going to put this at God's feet, they've made the situation far worse, right? In verse 10, so the taskmasters we think are Egyptians responsible for the building efforts, and the foremen of the people. So the foremen of the people are Hebrew foremen. So these are kind of the leaders of the Israelite workforce. They went out and said to the people, thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go and get your straw yourselves wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced in the least. So the people were scattered throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. The taskmasters were urgent, saying, complete your work, your daily task each day, as when there was straw. And the foremen of the people of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, why have you not done all your task of making bricks today and yesterday, as in the past? So see how this is starting to play out. Frustration's growing. It seems like there's a time frame that passes from when Pharaoh gives this order of no more straw, and they actually have to experience the consequences of that order for some time. And instead of just Moses and Aaron and God jumping right in and saying, hey, I'm going to take care of that, instead you need to feel some of the weight here. There's tension here. Things are getting worse. They're having to go find straw. They're not able to keep up. And notice what happened to the Israelite leaders. They get beaten. They get beaten because of what Moses and Aaron have done. So as Moses and Aaron, how are you feeling right now? Verse 15, then the foreman of the people came and cried to Pharaoh. So I want you to notice that word cry. It's the same word that's been used before to talk about the people crying out to God. Notice what's going on with Israel. They are not turning to God. They're not actually turning to Moses and Aaron and saying, cry out to God for us. Instead, who are they crying to? They're crying to Pharaoh. So you need to get the idea to some extent that the Israelite people have given up. They see Pharaoh as their king and their God. They don't go cry to God. They go cry to Pharaoh. Why do you treat your servants like this? So they are playing themselves as his servants. No straw is given to your servants. Yet they say to us, make bricks. And behold, your servants are beaten. But the fault is in your own people. But he said, you are idle, you are idle. That is why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Go now and work. No straw will be given you, but you must still deliver the same number of bricks. The foreman of the people of Israel saw that they were in trouble when they said, you shall by no means reduce your number of bricks, your daily task, each day. So things are getting worse. There's no relief of their efforts. They go to Pharaoh. They cry out. They remind him, we're your servants. We're your people. And his response is, sorry, that was your mistake. You shouldn't have listened to these guys. Verse 20, the taskmasters. They met Moses and Aaron, who were waiting for them as they came out from Pharaoh. And they said to them, the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us a stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. So get into the mindset of the Israelite foreman. They see themselves to some extent as under Pharaoh. They don't feel any sense of relief. They don't have any sense that this God is actually their God. They simply find themselves in a worse position, and they even think this is going to get us as the foreman of Israel. We are facing death. You have made us a stench in Pharaoh's nostrils. So we've gone from being slaves to people that he's thinking about just wiping out. If you're Moses at this point, you'd be pretty stressed. It's almost stressful reading this. Like, things are not going well, right? Verse 22, then Moses turned to the Lord and said, O Lord, Adonai, why have you done evil to this people? Notice Moses' response. God, you haven't done anything at all that's good. All you've done is make things worse. This is evil. Why, notice the second line, did you ever send me? Why am I here? This is pointless. For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all. Get what Moses is thinking and feeling. He's thinking, you sent me here, you promised me all this stuff, and all I've done is make the situation worse. And Moses, in a sense, and I kind of want to latch on this because I think it's a huge theme in the Psalms. Moses is, in his weakness, at the same time, he is free to wrestle with God. Almost, and we have to be careful here, but almost in an accusatory sense, he's saying, God, you said this, you promised this, and you know what? You haven't delivered your people at all. And I want to pause for just a second and think and ask you, to what point are you free to wrestle with God? It's something that's beautiful in the Psalms, as the psalmist often comes and says, how long, O Lord? How long must I wait? How long will you allow this to happen? You've made promises and you have yet to keep them. When will you keep your promises? And there is a sense of wrestling. As we finish this chapter, I want to ask you, to what extent can you wrestle with God in prayer? To what extent can you come and say, God, this is what you said, but this. And why am I want to make this kind of a big point? Because in a real relationship, there is tension. Even in our relationship with God, there is tension. There is, and there should be, desires in our heart, will, things we want to see happen. And there's also the rest of the world which doesn't seem to fit it. And the place in which those things seem to meet is prayer. And you see this also when Jesus prays, Father, this is not my will. Let this cup pass me. You see Jesus' will very strongly exerted, and yet at the same time you see him saying, but your will be done. And so I think both of those things are key things to think about for this section. We'll pause here and come back and hit chapter 6 and chapter 7. All right, chapter 5 ends with Moses kind of saying, God, where are you? I thought you were going to show up and do some stuff, and instead nothing's happened. We're just as bad as things were before, and maybe worse. He even says, God, you've done evil to this people. That's a pretty big accusation. And why did you send me at all? And in chapter 6, verse 1, but the Lord said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. So the word now there is pretty pronounced. It's a way of saying, okay, the moment has come. The tension is heightened. Get yourself ready. For with a strong hand, notice, Pharaoh will send them out. And with a strong hand, he will drive them out of his land. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. So God is saying, okay, the time is now. You're going to see not only am I going to lead this people out, but Pharaoh himself, the powerhouse of Egypt, is actually going to push the people out. He is my servant. I'm not his. He serves me, right? And then in verse 6-2, the tone to some extent changes. And I want you to see this as you read it. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. So that's the name of God. And verse 3, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. So here God is declaring, once again, it's not just the word Lord, but it's this name. It's this name Yahweh, the God who is present, the God who is self-existent, the God who has been, who will be, the God. There's the weight of being is kind of presented here. And it's interesting, he says, I did not make myself known by this name to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, what he's not saying is, oh, they didn't know I was called Yahweh. They didn't know my name. That's not what he's saying. It's clear from the text they knew who Yahweh was. They knew that name. But what God is saying is there's some further revelation. There's some further knowledge of who Yahweh is that is being laid out here that exceeds, that is far more than what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob got. So let's see how he fills that out, right? Because before he was known as God Almighty, El Shaddai, now by my name Yahweh, I will make myself known. Verse 4, I will also establish my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. So this is kind of a big deal, right? Because during the life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they knew they were simply sojourners in the land of Canaan. They did not have, as it were, possession of the land. They were simply there as wanderers. Moses, once again, this theme comes back up. Moses names his son Gershom. And the idea is, I'm a sojourner in a foreign land. And so something is beginning to shift here. God is saying, hey, I made these promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that they wouldn't just be sojourners, but that they, through their people, would possess the land. And God's saying, hey, guess what? This covenant isn't simply for those three guys. I'm establishing this covenant with someone else, with their children, to give them the land of Canaan. So the idea is going from sojourners and wanderers to possessors. Moreover, I've heard the groaning of my people in whom the Egyptians hold as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore, say to the people of Israel, I am the Lord. So he's reviewing stuff that promises were made in the past. He's reviewing the fact that he's heard them cry out. He's reviewing the fact that he's their God. And now he's moving into action. So notice all of these verbs. First he starts off, I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. And I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So first promise, I will bring you out. Essentially, the burdens that are laid on you, I'm bringing you out. You're going to be free. The burden is removed. First promise. Second, I will deliver you from slavery to them. So not only are you not going to be doing their heavy work, but you are going to be a free people. You're not going to be subject to their authority. You will be free. Third, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. So this word redemption is the idea of buying back. It's someone who's been sold into slavery, and essentially someone else goes in, purchases them, and then says, now you are free. You are no longer enslaved. And notice how he will redeem. It's this idea of an outstretched arm. I wish I could hold up my arm and show you a huge muscle here, but that's not my physique. I don't work out enough. But the idea is God, when he flexes his biceps, they are big. This is power. And he's saying with immense power and great acts of judgment, the idea is things will be set right and the earth will move to set things right. That's how I'm going to bring about your redemption. Verse 7, I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. So what God is expressing here is the idea of a unique covenant relationship, whereby these people are God's people. He owns them, and in a sense, it's almost as though he's saying, and you own me. There is a mutual tying together here that is unique. There's almost mutual possession. I will be your God, and you will be my people. And you shall know that I am Yahweh, your God. This word know that Pharaoh used before is the same one that's used here. He's saying, Pharaoh kind of says, I don't know this God. Who is he? I don't even know where he's from. I don't know him. I have no relationship with him. Why should I fear him? And God's saying, hey, I'm bringing you people into a relationship with me where you will know me. You will get who I am, and we will live in relationship. You shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. God wants this to be a defining aspect of their relationship. They are not equals. This people is not on par with their God. This people's identity will be that of slaves who have been redeemed. It's the idea that they are a redeemed people. They are in God's debt. He's redeemed them. It's not just that they've left slavery, but they are now under a new master. And he's a gracious king. He's a gracious master. He's taken off their burdens, but understand, this is a relationship with a God. Verse 8, I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. So this idea that God made covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They wandered around this land as sojourners. He's saying, now I am fulfilling that covenant and I'm giving it to you. I am the Lord. So part of what we need to step back and see here is that the name of God, Yahweh, is far more than just a haphazard name that sounds good, right? Most of us were named because our parents liked the sound of a certain name. But here, God is essentially giving meaning to his name by defining who he is and what he does. He's a God who redeems. He's a God who rescues. He's a God who owns a people, not in a slavish sense, but in the sense of they're my possession. I protect them. They're my people, in the same way that I would speak of my children. I own them. I protect them. I'm responsible for them. And conversely, they have a hold on me. And so God is revealing himself not simply as a guy who makes covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but as a God of a people. Something to talk about, something to think about and maybe discuss more on Sunday. Verse 9. So Moses gives this amazing speech that God's given to him. Hey, this is who God is. He's making himself known. And verse 9. Moses spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and harsh slavery. So God gives this amazing speech and the people completely ignore it. It's as though they can't even hear it. They are so broken down, they are so beaten down that it's like it doesn't even happen. Verse 10, so the Lord said to Moses, go in, tell Pharaoh the king of Egypt to let the people of Israel go out of his land. So you got to understand, Moses is just given this amazing speech and gets zero reception. And God's response is, okay, now go tell Pharaoh the same thing. Go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Verse 12, and Moses says, God. Moses said to the Lord, behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. My own people, the people that you're here to redeem, they don't even care. Their ears are closed to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me? For I am of uncircumcised lips. So what he's saying is, I can't even catch the ear of my own people who I'm promising freedom from slavery. What's Pharaoh going to do? I'm of uncircumcised lips. The idea here is I'm a common dude. I'm nothing special. My own people can't hear me, much less Pharaoh. Verse 13. But the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a charge about the people of Israel and about Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the people up out of the land of Egypt. So Moses is pushing back and saying, God, we've gotten nowhere. I'm going nowhere. Your own people don't listen. Why would you think Pharaoh's going to listen? And it's like God says, hey, sit down. I'm charging you with this. This is your mission. I'm doubling, tripling down, whatever term you want to use. Moses, I'm calling you, despite the fact that it seemed like this has been completely unfruitful, go and do it again, right? And so it makes us think, what is our response to obedience when obedience doesn't seem to work? All right, this kind of ends our second section. We're going to pause here and jump in and go from chapter 6, verse 14 to a little bit through chapter 7. So, thanks. The third section kind of picks up in an unusual way, right? So the second section ended with Yahweh charging Moses and Aaron again, bring the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Lays this charge, and then you kind of expect them to dive in. And instead, verse 14 picks up with something almost in our world a little bit ridiculous. It's a genealogy. So from verse 14 to 25, you have a list of names. This person gave birth to this person. This was the firstborn. This was the secondborn. Then this family had this person. Oh yeah, this guy had a son by a Canaanite wife. And we kind of got to ask why. And so part of the answer to that, first off, is in ancient times, genealogies weren't what they are today. Today, it's just something basically to be skimmed over, and you pick out some outstanding people. But in that day and age, it was very significant. This was your family line. History was important. Who your parents were, who your parents' parents were. Like many people could recite the names of their genealogies back, 10, 12, 15, 20 generations. It was important to know where you came from and who you were. And that's just, there's a cultural difference there between us now and how they operated then. But I do want us to notice a couple interesting things. There's some pretty significant people that pop up. Now, you kind of expect in this section the central people or the central person to be Moses, and instead it goes a little bit different direction, right? So it starts out with the sons of Reuben. So Reuben is the firstborn son of Jacob. He kind of has the primacy. He's supposed to be the lead, and so that's not entirely surprising. Then it goes to Simeon, secondborn son, his children, thirdborn son, Levi. But when you hit Levi, things begin to go not past Levi, but essentially they get further in depth. So it talks about Levi's sons, and then it kind of zooms in on just a couple of his sons, and then it gets to the point where it talks about this guy, Amram, and him taking his wife, Jochebed, and she bore him Aaron and Moses, and then talks about the years of his life being 137. And then there's some more names. So what I want to call attention to is this. It's interesting. It really focuses on Aaron instead of Moses, right? So Aaron takes as his wife Elisheba, the daughter of Abinadab and the sister of Nashon, and she bore him Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. So these are the four sons of Aaron. They become super significant later on in the narrative. Aaron is called out to become not just part of the priestly line of Levi, but he's called to be the high priest. And in a sense, his sons bear that mantle also, and they have super significance in the coming narrative. So notice that. And also, along with that, Eleazar, Aaron's son, this is the last verse 25, took as his wife one of the daughters of Putiel, and she bore him Phinehas. Phinehas is also super significant for his zeal for the Lord later on. So the first thing this genealogy kind of just signifies it's unrelated, or not unrelated, but just it's kind of weird to us because we're not familiar with that. We probably don't know who any of our relatives are past our great-great-grandfather. That's great-grandfather, great-grandmother. And so what I want us to know is this is significant to them, and even if it isn't significant to us, it doesn't mean it's not important. Second thing to think about is it's given to us because these guys later on do become more and more significant in the narrative, and we need to know their background. And the third thing I want us to notice is this is an excellent time, and the author knows this, for a narrative break. It's like he's raising the tension further and further and further, and then suddenly there's a narrative break to kind of ease the tension. And it's kind of funny. One of the ways that my wife and I have noticed this actually in modern day our world here is with the show VeggieTales. We love watching VeggieTales with our kids, and very often in VeggieTales the drama is ramping up, right? Like they're trying to figure out is Nebuchadnezzar going to throw Rakshak and Benny into the fire, and it's kind of getting tense. And then there's this narrative break where they go to silly songs with Larry. And the narrative break functions as a kind of to alleviate some of the tension, give us some time to think, kind of back off the story a little bit so that we can re-engage with heightened tension. So there's a very purposeful narrative break here. And it ends in verse 25. I'm going to pick up reading in verse 26. These, meaning speaking of that genealogy, these are the Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, bring out the people of Israel from the land of Egypt by their host. So it wants us to make sure we know these folks, they have grounding in our history. They are related way back to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They're part of the family line. They are in. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing out the people of Israel from Egypt, this Moses and Aaron. Now, what is kind of significant about calling them out is they have no significant place up to this point in Israel's family line. Like the Levites up until this point, they're just one of the other brothers, not a particularly well-known or famous or blessed brother. Levi is kind of a hothead from what we know. There's nothing special about Aaron and Moses. And it makes us think one of the emphases in this whole section is Moses is a guy just like everybody else. He doesn't have special, as it were, gifts. He does have some incredible weaknesses, and yet God is using essentially a shepherd, a nobody, to do great things. And part of that's just because it's trying to call our attention to God's power and not to Moses. Verse 28. On the day when the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, the Lord said to Moses, I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I say to you. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, I am of uncircumcised lips. How will Pharaoh listen to me? So 26 through 30 essentially repeat the section before the genealogy. They allow that genealogy to kind of have a little break. They remind us what just happened and where's it going. They remind us that once again, Moses is saying, God, I can't do this. I'm not set up for this. This is not going to work. The people haven't listened to me. Now you want me to go to Pharaoh? I got to face down the most powerful guy in my world at this point. He's not going to listen. And verse 7:1, chapter 7:1 says, and the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land. What God's doing here is just in a real brief way reminding Moses, no. You speak for me. You represent me. You represent God. I am God. Aaron speaks for you, but essentially this is off you. I think it's important for us, in a sense, to be where Moses is at, and we oftentimes be reminded that even though we are called to obedience and we are called to faithfulness, there are times where at places we just can't make stuff happen. We can witness our hearts out. We can share the gospel. We can love our children. We can love our wives. We can love our husbands. We can love our neighbors. We can do all these things. Ultimately, this section needs to be a reminder to us that only God can make mountains move. And so, question to pause and kind of ponder here is, where are you coming up against a place in your life where nothing less than God's movement is required? Your gifts, your abilities, even your obedience are not enough. Where do you need God to move supernaturally? Okay, verse 3, this is where it gets even more exciting. So Moses is kind of pushing back, saying, God, I can't even get Pharaoh to move. He won't listen to me. Verse 3, and God says this, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you. So Moses, in case you had any hope of pulling this off, I'm going to do wonders, I'm going to do miracles, but I am going to allow Pharaoh, I'm going to even motivate Pharaoh to be steadfast in his rebellion. He's not going to move, he's not going to shift, he's going to push back. So don't be worried, this is what's going to happen. Pharaoh will not listen to you. Verse 4, then I will lay my hand on Egypt. So same thing there. It goes back to the idea of the hand and the arm being strong. God's going to actually place his hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them. Moses and Aaron did so. They did just as the Lord commanded them. Now Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. So this section kind of ends with a big reminder that God is, in a sense, he's setting up a show, right? He is creating an environment in which there will be resistance. Unless there is major resistance to what he is going to do, there is no opportunity for him to demonstrate his power, his glory, for him to make himself known. And it's worth thinking about. This is going to kind of lead into some of the questions I want to ask as we kind of close the section. Things to think about for Sunday. First off, is there a place in your life right now where obedience is not only very hard, but it seems at times counterproductive and fruitless? Are there places in your life where you feel like, God, I am trying to do what you've told me to do, and it's only making things worse? Because that's not an uncommon theme in Scripture. There are times when our obedience doesn't seem to make things better. It actually seems to make it worse. I kind of want us to stop and think about that. And that kind of leads us to a second thing to think about. And that's, in this passage, you feel a tension between what God has said, I'm going to deliver my people, and I'm going to use you, Moses, and therefore I want you to go and do this. There's a tension between what God's saying and what God's promising, and the reality of the way the world is, right? Because Pharaoh doesn't just crumple, and Moses doesn't just lead the people out. In a sense, the more Moses goes and talks to Pharaoh, and the more he talks to the people, the worse things get. And I want to bring that up because I want us, sometimes as Christians, it's easy for us to try to be, actually, I'm going to use the term Buddhist in our response, which is, yeah, hard things don't faze me. There's no tension in me as far as what God does. Of course, God is sovereign, so I don't need to feel the weight of what's going on, when in actuality, according to the Psalms and according to Jesus, according to Paul, according to the New Testament and the Old Testament, there should be tension in our lives between what God has said and the way the world is. That's not inappropriate. That's not wrong. And according to so many of the Psalms, that's where Christians live, is this tension of the way things are and the way they should be. And how we begin to resolve that is through prayer. So I'd ask, where has God allowed there to be tension in your life that needs to drive you to pray? Third thing to think about, and this has to do with our identity and Israel's identity. It is interesting to think about the fact that God doesn't simply call Israel out of slavery and then say, get lost, go do whatever you want. Instead, he calls them out of slavery and into festival, worship, service, sacrifice. They are leaving one master who is terrible, wretched, evil, not to be masterless, but actually to have a good master, a good king. He's not calling them to be gods in and of themselves. He's calling them to a right relationship with himself. So one of the things to think about is, as Americans, it's really easy to get confused about whether or not my freedom is my idol, or do I worship the true God, the King, who calls me to serve and gives me joy in that service. But there's a distinction between the American idea of freedom and Scripture's idea of freedom. Fourth, I just want to ask, we oftentimes want to have, as it were, a sense or a feeling of God's presence. And a lot of times we equate that feeling or sense of God's presence in what we are doing. Like, if God's called me to do this and he's with me, then I will have immediate success, right? If I'm doing what God wants me to do, he's obviously going to grant me success. And here we find the opposite seems true, right? Moses seems to be obeying at every turn. He and Aaron are doing what God says, and then everything seems to go wrong. And so I want to ask you, how do we as a people judge whether or not we are being faithful? And are we good being obedient when it seems, I'm going to use this term specifically, when it seems fruitless, when we don't have success? And then lastly, God here defines himself in terms of what he does. He says, I am Yahweh. And then he goes through this extended discourse with all these verbs. I redeem, I save, I rescue, I bring power, I keep covenant. God defines himself by what he does. And he says, you will know me essentially as you experience my actions, the things that I do. Knowledge is far more than just head knowledge, and people are far more than just what they know. And so I'm taking a roundabout way of saying God is defined by his actions. He says, look at me, see what I do, enter into a relationship with me, and you'll know who I am. And I want to kind of flip that a little bit on its head and ask you, what does your life, the things you do, say about who you are? We're told both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, we will be judged by our works. And the idea here is not, I got to go check off and do a bunch of good things so that God will approve me. Rather, the idea is your works reveal who you really are. That's true of God, who God really is. He's a redeeming God. How do we know that? Because he redeems. He's a gracious God because he doesn't just smash and wipe out sinners. He loves to rescue the oppressed. He's a compassionate God. And we see who he is revealed in who he does. What does your actions, what does, looking back on the course of your life, the things you've done, what do they say about who you are? And that leads me to the next question. How would you, in a sense, judge yourself? How would you be able to say, what would you look back upon and say, yes, these are the fruit of God's work in my life? And I'm asking that all because I want to get to one question, and we're going to ask this again next week. What does fruitfulness look like? What does it look like for God to bear fruit in your life? So that's a lot to throw at you. Looking forward to Sunday. I'll try to bring these questions with me Sunday, and we'll jump back in. If you have other thoughts, feel free to email me, gpaulreader@gmail.com. I look forward to seeing you Sunday morning. Thanks. Bye.